Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's on this call. Thank you for attending this webinar by Beacon about enhancing supply chain collaboration through visibility. What is this webinar about? It is about supply chain resilience and how collaboration enhances supply chain resilience and through visibility. I'm Harish Manadyar, the founder of Shipping and Freight Resource. Today, we are joined by an elite group of panelists who I will introduce you just now. But before that, I just wanted to talk about supply chain resilience and what it is. Supply chain resilience is the capacity of your supply chain to withstand or recover quickly from any disruptions and challenges, of which there has been a lot recently, especially since COVID hit. So this increase in e-commerce and the fast-changing consumer trends have also driven more and more businesses to create resilient supply chains. And two of the key ingredients in achieving supply chain resilience is collaboration and visibility. And collaboration in supply chain can be enhanced through visibility, enabled by data sharing and also standards. So as per several surveys and interactions with the market, we've seen that the lack of supply chain visibility is a common problem, especially from cargo owners' perspective, because they also believe in the adage, if you can't see it, you can't manage it. So today, we are joined by some experts who can directly talk to these data standards and visibility and how this collaboration can enhance supply chain resilience. So a warm welcome today to David Cope. He's the head of marketing for Beacon. James Hookman, the director of Global Shippers Forum, and Kshitij Parashar from DSCA. Gentlemen, welcome to the webinar and thank you for being here. Could I request each of you to take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, please? Maybe we start with James.
Thank you, Harish, and hello to everybody on the call. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Yes, my name is James Hookham. I'm the Secretary General of an NGO called the Global Shippers Forum. And we act as a platform for beneficial cargo owners in international supply chains and give them a network amongst themselves, as well as an interface with regulatory agencies and other decision makers in the international logistics arena. We are very supportive of progress on a number of fronts, particularly automation and digitalization. But of course, as you said in your introductory remarks, Harish, a lot of GSF members, a lot of shippers have been particularly affected in recent years by the unprecedented number and scale of disruptions. So very looking forward to sharing our insights and some thoughts about how we can move forward on that topic.
Thank you, James. Kshitij, would you mind?
Thank you. My name is Kshitij Parashar, and a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who are attending this webinar. It's a pleasure to be here with this group. So my name is Kshitij Parashar. I work for the Digital Container Shipping Association. We are a standards body started back in 2019, and our mission is to act as a neutral non-profit organization, which is leading the effort to standardize the container shipping industry through our standards. And this is one of the places where we would like to share the opinions and what we see in the world around the trends around digitalization, and also the efforts we have made on standardization to address the issues which the BCOs are facing, but also the whole ecosystem of logistics in general, as Harish mentioned, since the beginning of COVID, but also predating COVID, and how we are trying to solve all these pain points for the consumers. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Kshitij. David?
Yes, wonderful. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining. My name is David Koch. I'm the head of marketing here at Beacon. And Beacon is a supply chain visibility, collaboration, and workflow management platform. What we're really trying to do, as you'll learn as we go through the session today, is enable every business with supply chain visibility and give them a suite of collaboration and workflow management tools that help them tap into all of the benefits that visibility can provide. Because one of the things that we love to talk about is that visibility is not just an internal capability, right? It's also something that you can extend to the other stakeholders in your supply chain. And that's really the lens that we're bringing to the work that we do. For me personally, I started my career in supply and demand planning at Target, a retailer that you may have heard of. So I've kind of come full circle now and working on the visibility side and wishing that I had these tools earlier in my career. So thanks for having me.
Thanks everyone. James, starting with you, we spoke a little bit about the consistent disruptions that have been happening in recent times. Has the views of your members changed in any way about supply chain resilience on the back of these disruptions? What are they talking about? What are their feelings?
Well, of course, it was a huge shock to realize just how vulnerable, how fragile global supply chains were, albeit under the enormous strain they suffered from the COVID health pandemic. But events subsequently have only perhaps confirmed the fragility of those supply chains. And certainly there is a very much a pre-COVID and a post-COVID view of this. Shippers were very much benefiting from relatively placid market conditions prior to COVID. As any shipping line would tell you, rates were very low. Service quality was actually generally rather good. There was a lot of business as usual going on. COVID itself and the events since COVID had changed that for good. And I think the way that it helps to look at supply chain disruption and the need for data visibility is to remember that from a shipper's point of view, a beneficial cargo owner's point of view, it's not so much the disruption to the supply chain that's the issue, it's the risk to inventory availability. That's the key issue for a shipper. Much as they might sympathize with their carrier's plight at any particular time, the question they're really asking is, how does this disruption affect the planned availability, the scheduled availability, or the delivery of the inventory that I'm actually moving? And that's not just an academic exercise. Shippers, by definition, are part of much bigger trading entities. So what's really at stake here is, do we need to shut down the production line? Are we going to make our sales window for a particular selling season? What are the implications and probably the penalties for missing a contracted delivery deadline to a third party? Will the project complete on time because key resources and materials are not going to be available? Customer order fulfillment is in jeopardy. That's the real question and challenge behind supply chain disruption. And that's the language and the phrasing of questions that shippers are expressing to me and for which they're searching for answers. So that language and that level of concern has certainly arisen out of the COVID pandemic and has become, regrettably, a persistent series of questions as this surprising succession of issues has arisen.
Thanks, James. David, if I may jump to you. James mentioned about the risks that the shippers are scared about. How do you see visibility and the data that is available can help businesses mitigate such risks in their supply chains?
Absolutely. I think it's a great question. And, I think really what it boils down to at the end of the day is the knowledge is power argument, right? When we talk to people about visibility, it gives you control, and it's really a risk management tool. It's a form of insurance in times of crisis. And I think, as James alluded to, right, in today's supply chain landscape, your success is down to your ability to control the impact and manage the impact of this crisis on your operations. And the reason that so many businesses struggle in these situations, it's not because they don't know what to do. It's because they have to take too much time to figure out the current state of play, right? They don't even know where their stuff is, so they can't possibly know the sort of scope of what they're dealing with. And what this does is it slows supply chains down. It delays decision making and it delays the implementation of risk responses. And as we all know, right, in times of crisis, the sooner you can act, the more you can do to sort of control the output. So really, visibility gives you that real-time view, or as I like to sort of call it, on-demand situational awareness that's going to give you the ability to act quicker when these things do happen. Because nobody's going to sit up here today and tell you that the risks are going to go away. They're here to stay. They're probably going to become more frequent as we deal with climate change and all of these other things. But if you can be alerted to a problem automatically, right, which is one of the sort of core value propositions of visibility at a fundamental level, instead of having to go research and identify that problem yourself, then you're giving yourself that time to focus on what you're going to do about it.
Great points. Kshitij, I can see you nodding your head, and I'm sure DCSA already has some tools up their sleeve, or so what you call standards. But before we get to that question, can you define, or can you say what is the definition of standards before you answer the main question, which was how do standards help in mitigating these risks?
Sure. I think it's a very relevant question to begin with, right? Because how I would like to put standards is that whenever there is a data exchange happening at a certain level in any supply chain, there are inherently a number of messages getting exchanged from one place to the other, right? So if you call BCO and they book their cargo through a shipping line, there is a lot of documentation flow which happens. There's a lot of operational messages which get exchanged, right? And what we had seen in the past and also throughout the history of container shipping, right? There's a massive exchange of information which happens in terms of millions of messages are exchanged globally for a given period, right? So there are millions of TUs on the sea, and imagine each container has its own set of document data points which are being exchanged. Now the problem was, or still is, that there is a lack of common language, or there's a lack of standardized way to say what an event means. What does typically arrival means? What does typically having a documentation received means, right? So what we did from DCSA's perspective is we have standardized these definitions. We have standardized the processes which belong to container shipping. How we did it is through our power of collaboration, through our members. So DCSA is founded by all the top 9 container shipping lines in the world, and recently we have also joined by PIL, so that makes it 10 biggest container shipping companies in the world. So what we did there was understand the whole process around it, and then make the standards which are a common practice across the whole container shipping ecosystem. So that's how I define standards. They are a common language enabled by what we define as a common process and common understanding of the data which gets exchanged in a typical container shipping ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a great explanation. James, do your members see the role of data standards and visibility in being able to enhance supply chain resilience?
Oh, absolutely. And I was saying earlier what the questions are being asked, at least the ones I'm hearing about. But the answers to those questions are very much in terms of improved visibility and understanding of what's actually going on. But I do make distinctions between the sort of the real-time data, which I think is very much what is needed when there are disruptions. So a lot of the questions, for example, that we've been handling this year have obviously arisen from the decision by most, certainly container shipping lines and most operators, to avoid the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. So what's going to happen to my inventory schedules now? What are the implications of that? So clearly there are immediate implications for cargo that's on the water and was on its way to Europe or to the East Coast of America from the Far East. there were then a sort of second level of questions being asked about. So what does this mean for future bookings, future orders? Should I bring forward my planned inventory deliveries because of this diversion? What does that mean in terms of what I'm going to have to be paying my carrier to bring this in? So there's sort of three sort of different levels at which data informs shippers about what's going on, a very much a near, medium, and longer term perspective. So different types of data to answer different types of question, but at times of disruption, and we saw it again with the mercifully very short period of stoppage at the East Coast ports in America, but more particularly around the impact of the hurricanes in the US. So what does that mean for the next few weeks, months during recovery processes? How do we work around what is clearly a situation that's not going to resolve for some time? Should we be rerouting? Should we be reordering? Should we be double ordering, which was a remedy often adopted during COVID, just to make sure the stuff finally did get through? But in order to do that, you really do need to know where your stuff is now and where it might be at some other future point when you've addressed those issues.
Yeah, thanks, James. David, do you agree with what James has said? And I'm sure you would have some examples, practical examples where visibility has helped shippers from Beacon's perspective. Would you mind sharing some?
Yeah, absolutely. To James's point, I think, we very much see visibility in the same way, and we often talk about sort of like there's the in the moment purpose of visibility, which is exception management, right? It's like, this is not where it's supposed to be. This is delayed. I need to tell my warehouses. I need to tell my customer who's expecting those goods. So that's like very much the reactive day-to-day piece of it. And then there's the more strategic aspect of this. And there's sort of two elements to this as well, right? There's the historical diagnostics. So what has happened in the past, right? Okay, we've just survived another holiday season. So let's go back and let's see what routes were most prone to delay, which carriers, which forwarders were causing us the most problems, all these sorts of things that can sort of inform your strategic network planning, if you will, right? And it's like, okay, we're having persistent problems on the Shanghai to LA route. What are our options to avoid that risk or to mitigate the risk of that route on our supply chain? And then ultimately there's the third element, which is what we all want to get towards, which I don't think very many people are there yet, which is the predictive analytics component. So it's, okay, let's use what's happened in the past to make a projection about what's going to happen in the future. And, very much we see people at the moment focusing on the first two buckets. I think the predictive piece is something that will come as the industry gets more mature, as our digital infrastructure gets more mature. But, in terms of how Beacon customers are tapping into the benefits of visibility, I'm going to first talk about sort of the most common use case that we're seeing, which is keeping their customers updated. And this is, perhaps the most simple of all use cases. It's literally creating a dashboard that says, okay, these are all the shipments or these are all the orders for, particular customer. Maybe I'm, selling into Target or Walmart. I don't want to have to be answering all of their questions about where their stuff is. So I'm just going to create this live dashboard with just a single link, send it to them, and they're getting notified to changes just in the same way that I am. So you're eliminating this whole need for all this admin back and forth with your customers to make sure that they know what's going on. And I think, this is in part necessitated by the Amazon effect, right? We all expect everything tomorrow and we want to be able to track it like we track our Domino's pizza, every step along the way. But ultimately it's a huge amount of admin work to sort of keep up with that. So that's one of the most common use cases. Another sort of in a similar vein is warehouse visibility, right? Inbound warehouse visibility. So in the same way that I can create a live dashboard for every customer, I can create a live dashboard for all of my warehouses so that they have a real-time view of what's inbound, and they can, adjust as necessary when things get delayed, push forward, or whatever it may be. And then I think if we're talking a little bit more about the sort of diagnostics part of it, right, looking back at what has happened, one of the use cases that we're seeing a lot here is around demergent detention. I think there's a lot of stories about people being like, oh yeah, the finance department understands demergent detention better than I do as the supply chain operator, and that's not a great situation to be in. So we both have sort of in the moment alert me to containers that are nearing their included free days. But equally, we're enabling people to look at that historical data and say, these are the ports or these are the routes where I'm incurring the most emergent detention, so that you can then take that insight, go have a conversation with your forwarder or your haulier who's responsible for picking goods up at the port, whoever it may be, to work through those issues.
So learning from the past and looking to the future, kind of action.
You got it.
Kshitij, if I have to ask you the same question in terms of some of the initiatives that DCSA has done to improve real-time visibility, what would those be?
Yeah, so to add on to the points which James and David mentioned also, right, I would like to point out on the initiative sides, right, we have 3 pillars on which we work upon, right? So one is operational efficiency. So all the things which James and David mentioned around, how are you proactively informed about anything which happens to your cargo, and then what are you able to do with it in a short span of time? That's what we call as being efficient, right? Whether it's admin related, whether it's customer related. Then the other part is around the customer experience. So what is your customer actually getting and how quickly they're getting it in order to. And then the last one is obviously sustainability, which is around reduction of paper in the whole ecosystem, and also creating these enhanced way of data sharing. So the waiting times or the turnaround times for your trucks, for your ships are reduced as much as possible, overall contributing towards the sustainable outlook for the industry, right? So if I have to mention about few key components of the standardization work which we have done, one is obviously around EBL. So what we did was we have created e-bill of lading standard, and also through the collaborative power which we have through various stakeholders in the industry. A particular one is Fit Alliance, where we have around 200 participants, and all the participants in the ecosystem have committed that by 2030 they commit to go 100% EBL. So that's one of the key sort of out there statements that there is a push from the industry. And it's not only there's the container shipping companies, it's from the banks, it's from the insurers, it's from the freight forwarders, so it's a collective way the group is asking that, yes, we are committed to go towards it. Then comes track and trace, which is a very key component of visibility, right? Having the know-how and having the awareness of what data to expect, and to be used in systems like for example for Beacon, right? Imagine that a backend layer of data which is always standardized. You are bound to get that information which is there in the standard as and when it happens. So track and trace has enabled that. And what we have also achieved recently is that all of the DCSA member container shipping lines are now using one set of standards to exchange the data. So that's another one which is happening. And the other part is around schedules, which is also considered to be a very critical component of the industry, right? Receiving schedules on time, and to be informed proactively about anything which changes, right? With all the disruptions, there are number of port omissions which happen, blanking which happens. So, as and when they happen, your customers are at the receiving end of it, right? Because a ship certainly misses a port, and then the whole supply chain has to be proactively changed. So that happens. The other part is around booking requests, right? So a typical booking is a negotiation between a customer and the shipping line, right? And that standard is also developed. Overall, if we see what we are enabling through our standardization work is to enhance the digitalization of the industry by making sure that the standards we are offering are serving the operational component, which is the operational efficiency part, dealing with the terminals, the ports, and the container shipping lines, And on the receiving end of the customer, you have the track and trace standard, you have the bill of lading, you have the booking request, you have the commercial point-to-point routing standards, which enable the customer to receive the information in a standardized manner and enabling them to also have this proactive way of dealing with their operations, their supply chains, their activities, to make sure that whatever disruption happens, they are able to manage it in a short span of time, thereby increasing the efficiency. But also what David mentioned, over a period of time in the near future, due to historical data powered by the use of standards, there will be more predictive analytics, more innovation, which we can see in this space happening. So I think that's where the power of standardization comes from our point of view.
So you're saying you're bringing everybody together to the table to do this.
Yes.
Just for the audience, thank you for joining, first of all. And the Q&A box is open. So if you have any questions for any of these gentlemen, please do so. James, you heard these data people talking data, a lot of it. I'm sure your shippers have some concerns about security, or are they well aware of it? Are they fine with it? How are they handling the data security and privacy aspects?
Well, I think they're very much in the mode of thinking not so much as shippers as, if you like, as customers of shipping lines or other carriers, or indeed other logistics service providers. I think it's really important for the data community to remember that all shippers are part, again, of much larger corporations, and they will have, or at least should have, if they haven't, very stringent cybersecurity protocols and policies in place, as well as protection policies and standards for the protection of data, especially obviously personal data, insofar as individual customers might be identified. Plus, of course, there are a lot of financial transactions, so there is a lot of very sensitive data being exchanged as part of a traditional international freight flow. So committing, I mean, not the paperwork doesn't have its risk, but committing all of that into a digital environment is a big step for any organization to take. Obviously, it needs to be accompanied by the right protections and security, not just for the individual shipper's data, but to make sure it doesn't expose a vulnerability for the entire system. But that's a rather obvious statement. The other big issue that I think remains to be fully understood and resolved is data ownership, and the ability in theory, for analysis and data mining of inventory flows and so on to be undertaken, possibly for the intent of innocent activities, but clearly there are opportunities for bad actors to become involved. And rightly, the rights of ownership of certain information needs to be respected by platform providers, as well as expectations around information being made available and parties notified in the event of data loss or breach or a hacking incident. Now, the Global Shippers Forum, together with FIATA, the International Association for Freight Forwarders, did produce a short document setting out what our collective expectations were of data providers in this regard. It's no secret, it's closely modelled on what we've come to expect in Europe under the GDPR regulations, the General Data Protection Regulations, and talks about respecting the rights of ownership, the need for provision of adequate security and cyber data protection standards, plus notification in the event of loss or breach. So it's a developing issue, but it's certainly one which shippers will be asking potential solution providers about in their conversations.
So David, listening to James, am I right in saying about the concerns of data ownership? You do not actually store any of those data, and most of the data is operational. I mean, from both David and Kshitij, I'm assuming those two will be purely operational. And how would your companies address these concerns? Starting with David.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in today's world, you've got to be thinking about cybersecurity for all the reasons James alluded to. So I think, it's definitely something that we think about. But equally to your point, Harish, like when it comes to Beacon in particular, most of the data that we're dealing with here, it's operational data. It's not personally identifiable information. It's not PII. So I think all this to say that this is not implementing a visibility solution is not the same as payment processing or all these things that rightfully warrant the sort of highest degree of cybersecurity investigation. Not to say that it's not important, and not to say that we don't have these conversations on a daily basis, but I think certainly in the case of Beacon, we don't have PII flowing through there. So it often makes these conversations about just getting started so much easier. Because we do know, especially like in big organizations, there can be the fear of the person who wants to undertake the project of, how long is this going to take to get through the bureaucracy of my organization? And thankfully we've not had too many issues with that. And I think, as we're talking about the collaboration theme, if I can sort of tie it back to that as well. Obviously, one of the big parts of Beacon's value proposition is this idea of visibility for you and visibility for everybody in your supply chain. So there is an inherent data sharing component. We've designed our sort of shareable dashboards to accommodate different levels of security for different organizations for this express purpose. But that combined with NDAs and sort of some other sort of legal mechanisms that your cybersecurity practitioners are going to be aware of, in more cases than not, will be enough to sort of get your visibility project off the ground. So my sort of advice on this particular topic would be, think about cybersecurity. It's important. We'll be there with you for all those questions, but don't let it be the thing that stops you from making progress in this particular domain.
Kshitij, from your perspective, I think you will. DCSA is only enabling the data and data sharing through standards.
Yeah.
You're not collecting any data per se. Am I right?
Yeah. So what we are doing is, and the way to provide our standard, it's through APIs, right? And APIs by definition, the way we are defining it in our design principles is that we do authentication, we do all the typical aspects of API security management, be it around use of OAS 2.0, 3.0, and all these typical mandate security protocols which are existing for APIs, so that whoever is consuming these APIs can be assured that the data which they are having is prevented. And obviously it depends, it's also from our side, like you already said, we are an open source body, so the API standards inherently provides that security layer compared to traditional ways of data exchange, right? So, and I'm talking traditional layers like an email or fax for that matter, and it might be a surprise, but fax is still being used in the container shipping industry, and inherently it is not the safest way to exchange information. But also on the EDI layer, for example, there are vulnerabilities which what we identified can be resolved through APIs, and that's what we are providing. And I think also combined with that, the whole EBL related, a secure way of exchanging bill of lading through APIs rather than having a paper which either gets stuck due to some disturbances or for any other matter and ends up in the wrong hands, is also not the ideal way, right? So that is one example where it can directly contribute towards this protection of consumer data, so to say.
So, Kshitij, speaking about your data standards currently that you have in place, and also the electronic bill of lading documentation, how has the adoption been? Have you been facing any challenges? Are there still delays in that? Where do we stand in terms of the adoption of these standards and standards?
Yeah, so like I said, DCSA has been there for 5 years, and within the last 5 years, we have released a few standards where we are seeing constant growth in terms of adoption. Now we have to see it from a perspective that the adoption happens at the container shipping line level, which I'm happy to report that we are seeing a large trend towards adoption in this year and the last year. We are seeing a constant upwards curve towards adoption. Like I mentioned, track and trace is now adopted by all the container shipping lines. That means you are bound to get standardized track and trace data through the API, which is DCSA standard enabled. And also the other standards are following, right? So adoption still remains our biggest challenge, but it is also the biggest motivation, because if I'm seeing it just from the perspective of the number of connections who are using the APIs, who are using the data standards from DCSA, it's an increasing curve. And if I'm comparing it to previous standardization efforts, for example, IATA and AWE bill, the time taken to get to the level of adoption was much longer than what we are seeing on DCSA standards, right? So, and I think this also contributes from the fact that, there is a whole wave of digitalization. And we recently did a survey, which is called the State of Industry report. And I would recommend all the ones who are listening here to have a look at it, where we clearly see there's a big interest from the cargo owners to talk about digitalization, to talk about things which improve their operational efficiency. Up to the level of 85% BCO members are saying that they want standards and they want these things to contribute towards their operational efficiency and customer experience. And I think this is a very big statement coming from the industry. And obviously it depends on the geographies where these people are based, but we see a common trend that everyone is asking for digitalization, and what they experience in terms of barriers to adoption is access to the right IT support, access to the right architecture, and all these collective issues, which can only be solved through collaboration, replacing legacy systems, going into more advanced way of getting the data, having a modern layer of APIs to get the information. These are all the challenges which we saw in that report. And I think I would not call adoption as a challenge for now. I would more see it as an opportunity, because it is giving us the opportunity to connect with, and also this call, for example, this webinar, it is a means to say that, there is a collective interest to tackle these issues together. And I think that's what I want to be concluding around adoption with. Yeah.
Good, thanks. James, just to add to what Kshitij is mentioning, from the report, I've also seen that the BCOs seem to be having a lot of reluctance, if I may call it, for this adoption, because after all, the need is, or the requirement also should come from the shippers, because they are the ones actually buying and selling and dealing with cash flow. Have you seen any barriers in that aspect from your members?
Well, I prefer not to think of them as barriers. I think that they are part of the required process of adoption. It's back to my earlier point that again, for certainly medium and definitely larger companies, just remember they are quite large organizations. And even though a shipping department manager might be convinced of all the benefits that David and Kshitij have described for digitalization, it will be a matter of internal process as to how those systems are brought on board. And platform providers will not be dealing with the shipping manager. They will need to convince the CIO or the head of the IT department of the integrity of their cyber protection policies and data protection. They will need to explain to the finance department how a set of standards or a system that is nominally intended to facilitate trade documentation does integrate with the ERM, so that payments can be made. And just looking at the questions that are now starting to come through, Harish, this has got to integrate with the payment systems and the banking systems as well. It's not just a passive terminal sitting in the shipping department in which people are going to be keying in bill of lading data. It's got to become, if it's going to work, and certainly if the return on investment is to be achieved by the shipper. It's got to capture all of the other data flows that are present in the business and are obviously under control of other departments, other directorates. So I think the reluctance isn't because digitalization isn't for us. It is because it is quite a big challenge, and there are a lot of people to bring on board and to convince.
And
this is
I understand. David, are you seeing these similar trends in adoption of visibility technology as well from customers? Are you seeing any growth? What sort of growth are you seeing there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I agree with everything James and Kshitij have both said there. And I think to James's point, as is the case with every piece of software in every industry, anywhere, the success is always down to change management and how well you can implement that. So I think like, while the supply chain is maybe the supply chain sort of sector is a little bit behind some other sectors in terms of this digital transformation, these are not unique challenges to supply chains. I think the unique challenges is in the complexity and interoperability required between so many players in the supply chain, but it's not something that, can't be overcome. And in terms of, the adoption of technology, I think, to James's point, like the train is leaving the station, as it were, right? We are seeing people recognize the need for this, people being asked for it, right? Oftentimes it's arising out of a customer who's really annoyed that they don't know where their stuff is or whatever it may be. That's sort of this, triggering event for taking these sort of visibility projects more seriously. And I think, there's a couple points I'll add here. One is that we're seeing people evolve their thinking beyond just the freight tracking use case. Because I think for better or for worse, big organizations like Gartner, right, they call all visibility solutions real-time transportation visibility, which is sort of reductive, right? It like boils it down to like, it just does this one thing. It tells you where your stuff is. And a lot of people don't necessarily feel like they have a problem in that area, right? They do a lot of these things manually, but they have processes that are tried and tested and work for them. So I think just relying on that is not going to sort of get you where you need to go. But I think when we start talking about workflow automation and risk management, right, these themes that we've touched on a little bit today, once you start introducing those use cases to people sort of start to get it and realize that it's more than just this automated freight tracking thing. So that's really helping it. And, to your point about the growth, Harish, like, I'd say 10, 20x where we were a year ago, just in terms of the number of inbound queries that we're seeing of people who are interested in this. So, there's definitely this feeling that like the market is starting to move, and, as with all of these things, sort of once, the early adopters go, then the rest quickly follow. And I think, James also talked a little bit about like the interoperability aspect, right? And I think the other thing that we're seeing is a bit of a shift away from this thinking that I have to do everything in my ERP and like building every solution into the ERP. APIs, as Kshitij alluded to, make interoperability with like sort of platform solutions like ours that are solving sort of a discrete part of the overall problem. It makes that way easier. So instead of trying to replicate the functionality of a visibility platform in your ERP, which is sort of the legacy way of thinking, and unfortunately the way that a lot of people still think, it's okay, I can buy this, I can plug in this solution that in a couple of days that would otherwise take me a year to build, and start to realize some of the benefits. And in that way, the ERP functions the same way as sort of a CRM does, right? It's just it's a place to sort of broker and route data from one place to another. And I think that is the way of the future, right? Building your sort of supply chain tech stack with the ERP at its center, and plugging things in, and if something's not quite working, you replace it with someone else, and it's just a lot more agile way to sort of manage your technology.
Truly connecting everything back to each other. Kshitij, I think there's a question here which probably might be better suited to answer. It says, James mentioned the digital infrastructure that is still developing. What digital infrastructure is required from port logistics hubs?
Okay. I see it coming from Paul Walter. I think I know where he's coming from. So in terms of port logistics, right, like we have said, it's important to understand where the ports and specifically terminals play a part in terms of the container shipping, right? So they are the ones who are receiving the containers, and then it's preparing for the hinterland transport. So typical processes which happen, and I'll go a little bit more into the detail here, right? For example, transshipments, gate ins, gate outs, inspections which happen. These are typical areas where the customers are interested to know from a visibility perspective, transparency, to know what is happening once your container is arriving at a port, right? And if you think of a port like Port of Rotterdam, for example, and any of the terminal there, right? If you are able to fetch that information of data on the container level, that this particular container is now gated in and it's ready for either being loaded or the trucker can come and pick it up. That level of information on the digital infrastructure side is what we believe as DCSA is enabled through APIs, because they provide as and when the things happen, the APIs are able to send you that data compared to what is happening right now. And this is also the part of change which is going to happen in the coming future is around the availability of those batch of data which processes via EDI, for example. A huge bunch of data gets through EDI, then goes to whoever is the owner of the container, and they get the information, and then they send it out. In a typical case, it can also take a few hours to a few days, depending upon the digital maturity of that particular port and terminal. That is not ideal, because that creates a sort of a black box in the whole ecosystem, because you don't know once the container is on the port what is actually happening with it, whether it's stacked somewhere, whether it's ready for getting gated out, or whether it's ready to be put onto another vessel for a transshipment move. Now, through the standardization effort which we have done, we have made sure that all these typical events which happen with the container are part of the standard data set, which we enable via our track and trace standard or via commercial schedule. So each and every participant is aware that these are the things which will happen with their cargo. And how Port Logistics Hub can work is, once the standards are there, specifically fit for purpose for them to exchange data between them to the container shipping line, is to embark on that journey of adoption and changing their infrastructure to receive APIs. Their terminal operating systems are currently designed not to send, for example, data to the outside ecosystem. It's a closed ecosystem, which is digital in nature. But to be able to have this data going from one point to the other and be able to have that information as and when it happens is what will enhance the connectivity of ports in terms of the track and trace exercise as well. And this is one of the key areas which we are trying to touch upon in the coming year, to basically improve the quality of the track and trace standards which we have developed, because it is inherently the point which James mentioned a little bit earlier, data ownership. Data ownership is, for these typical events which I mentioned, happens at the terminal. And then a lot of processing of data happens to reach actual end customer. And we want to reduce the time of information getting exchanged through the standard and through the API, so it gets more real time. And I think that is an area which we are committing to work towards in the coming year or so that the experience end to end can be improved for all the ecosystem players, including ports as well.
Okay, that sort of ties into what Jack Ong is also asking. He says we need control tower and centralized data to feed all the standardized information to the world. In your view, David, who do you think can do this? Because obviously now we have shippers on one side, we have forwarders, we have carriers, we have visibility providers like yourselves, the standards organizations, Fit Alliance, so many people in the mix. So who's going to be able to provide something like a control tower or to provide some data centralization?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would encourage you to go to beacon.com and book a meeting, and we'd love to chat to you about that. But I'll pause that there. I mean, I think really it boils down to sort of what data points you're working with, right? Because different solutions are going to cater to different data points and different actors in the supply chain. So sort of without knowing sort of exactly where you're positioned in the network of supply chains or of a supply chain, I can't sort of comment more concretely than that. But you know, it's certainly something that we do a lot for shippers and BCOs, and there's tons of other solutions out there doing it for other parts of the supply chain as well. So apologies for that top answer.
Which reminds me of one more question for you, David. So even James also was speaking about the big shippers and big customers. What about the small people? What about the small to medium enterprises? How is Beacon accessible to those customers, or is it out of reach for them?
For sure. We love small businesses, the mid-market. I think for a long time, the supply chain tech has been catered, marketed, sold to enterprises almost exclusively, right? And the mid-market and smaller businesses have really been left behind. And, you know, at Beacon, we have some customers who are only moving 50 containers a year and are still seeing tremendous value from the platform because of all this sort of workflow automation, all these workflow automation benefits that I was talking about before. And it's one of those things that, you know, our platform is priced to grow with you, right? We're gonna charge you, you know, a few $100 a month if you're you know, at the 50 containers level, and then as you grow, we'll grow with you. And I think the other thing that you know, forgive me for the self-promotion here, but the other great thing about Beacon is that it's designed to be completely non-technical, which is particularly important in the SME when you don't have the same sort of IT resources expertise that you might have in a bigger company. You know, what we're trying to do is plug and play visibility, right? Get on a call with us, start your free trial, get up and running in a couple days, you know, replace your master tracking spreadsheet, all this sort of stuff, and leave that sort of grunt work to us and free up your time to do other things. So, you know, definitely seeing a lot of traction in the mid-market and really relief from these people who finally have solutions that they can actually afford to help them with these sorts of things. Because I think, you know, there's a sentiment that they were sort of frustrated with the amount of sort of enterprise tech and enterprise pricing and in need of solutions.
It sounds like David is giving you a lot of homework, James. So
well, I know he made light of the fact that Beacon might be the answer to the previous question, but I don't think we should trivialize it. I think to Jack's original question, that this is an opportunity to which the market is responding. And going back to the very first series of points we were making about the fact that it is a very different market environment and market business climate that we're working in, this has all of a sudden become a much more urgent issue for shippers and supply chain managers. And I'd like to pick up a point that David also made. The traditional remedy to this would just be to hire more people. This is not business as usual. I need people on the phones. I need people handling emails. I need people talking to customers. So that's one route. Surely the better route is, well, let's try and work out to get the right information in the right people's hands at the right time. And that's the opportunity that I think we're addressing. And Beacon are one. I'm sure David won't be annoyed if I say that other solution providers are available. But this is a very fast changing opportunity and market. And I'm certainly encouraging shippers to stay very close to this, because you're absolutely right. This is not going to revert to a lower level of activity. There are a whole range of really big threats and risks to international supply chains emerging, which we haven't got time to get into today. But this must be an area where shippers are putting in time and management effort to address, because certainly our advice to them is you can't just go from crisis to crisis. You need to get a hold on this and improve your level of awareness and understanding of where your stuff is, so that you can make the right responses.
That's some very good closing points there, James. Kshitij, do you have any closing comments?
Yes, like I've been talking about in the whole webinar, it is about collaboration, which also says in the title, right? The collaboration comes through the understanding that the use of data and standards is not an option. It's really looking towards improving the current way things are and going towards a better future, right? With all the consideration, disruptions, and things which are happening around us. What we see from DCSA's perspective is standardization is the way to establish a solid base to build upon all these problems, right? And that has been echoed by the industry as well, quite a lot of times, and we are also seeing an upward trends in that side. So if we want to contribute towards sustainability, if we want to contribute towards an operational efficient supply chain, and also enhance customer experience where the life of James can become easier, I think from our side, we would encourage the people who are in the call, but also from this means, right? To have the adoption of the standard, to ask for the standards, to think about APIs, to think about what all we are offering from a standardization perspective can be helpful for them, and then try to act together as a group and solve this issue through collaboration, and also visibility will then be ensured. So that's my parting comment on this.
Great. Thanks, Kshitij. David, do you want to close from your side?
Absolutely. I think, my best advice is to start somewhere and to start now. Don't try to bite off the whole problem and design a perfectly architected solution and, spend 2 years on implementation. I think starting to build your data set is the best thing that you can do for your future supply chain today, right? Because I shouldn't say you can't. It's very difficult to sort of go back in time and amass that historical data set that's going to give you those predictive insights. And while, you might not be in a place to start using that data for predictive purposes yet, building that data set is incredibly valuable. And I think the other thing that I would say is visibility solutions are only as good as the data that feeds into them. And as Kshitij alluded to, right, there's still work being done on this, but progress is being made. And you don't need 100% accurate data to start realizing the benefits of this, right? Even if it's 70, 80%, you're still going to be in a much better position than you were before. So, don't get hung up too much on data quality, because all the work that's being done, everything that we've talked about here, this is all moving the needle in the right direction on that front. And you don't want to wait until data accuracy across all solutions is 100%, because it's probably never going to come, and you're also going to be way behind the market when it comes to this change. So I think the third and final point that I'll make is challenge your thinking about the way that you're doing things right now, right? It's likely that you've built processes around legacy tools, right? Customer or sort of carrier portals for tracking, and emails for document management, and sending spreadsheets back and forth. And these processes might feel really well refined and they work well for you. But tapping into sort of all the benefits that we talked about today sort of requires a stepping out of that mindset, and sort of expanding your thinking a little bit on what the benefits are beyond just freight tracking, right? It can really transform the way that you work. It can allow you to do more with less and stay on top of risk in a better way. So, I think inertia is always the hardest part with these projects. And as we were touching on before, change management is important. So, start somewhere. Don't fret about the data too much, and don't be afraid to sort of challenge your thinking and try something new.
Well, it's been a very interesting conversation, gentlemen, and to those who are online and who will be viewing this recording as well at some stage, we've brought together industry representatives, shippers, we've brought the visibility companies, we've brought the standards bodies. So everybody who are representing the carriers, by the way. So everybody is in this room in one forum, which is actually quite unusual. But as you can see, everybody is working towards collaborating to create that visibility through the data that is coming in order to create that supply chain resilience that your business needs. So the adoption rates are going up, but in my view, and from what I've seen, it is not going up as quickly as it should be in order to benefit you, obviously, as the consumer or as the shipper or the importer. So the my parting comment is to take into account all that has been discussed here, visit these websites of these companies, understand what has been happening, and also try your hand at it, as David mentioned as well. You do not need to do everything at the same time. You can start in parts. There's specific components available. DSCA has track and trace separately, vessels separately, ship schedules separately. So there are different options available, and combine all those, try and test these theories and see what works for you. And ultimately you will achieve supply chain resilience. From Harish Manadia, Shipping and Freight Resource, from James, from David, and from Kshitij. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day.